Da, 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 da.
Hey,
Hey, it's functioning. Hooray.
yeah, it's nice to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. Are you good to go?
Yeah,
Cool.
absolutely. I'm so excited for this.
Then this part where I say theme song,
Nice.
and then we come in hot with a hello and welcome to Hello, We Don't Talk, Let's Talk, the show where I, Christopher Hua, reconnect with old friends. And today, from across the nation, we have the wonderful Carolyn Baer. Carolyn, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. I'm so excited about this.
Likewise. So the last time I think I would have seen you, unless you made like a you popped your head into camera at any point, would have been like the last day of grade eight.
Oh my
Um,
gosh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, you you
Yep.
you then went off to Eastwood. I don't know if anyone else in our grade eight class went to Eastwood as well.
No, I don't think so. I think I was the only one.
Lone wolf in it.
Yep, all on my own.
Frankly, we saw your mom more than we saw you after that
I
point.
know. That's half the reason I went to Eastwood. I just
um,
felt like, oh, I can't do it.
hey,
I
that's
can't.
perfectly fine. I think I've only met like one person that went to the same school that their parents taught at, so you know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not for everyone for sure.
Yeah, well, it's especially weird because I was like really into music in
Yeah.
high school, and I just felt like there is no way that I can do that and like see my mom all the time at home, at school. Like,
You got to give
gotta have
yourself
some
some
separation.
space. um,
Yeah.
and then after that, the things I know about you are completely like blank. Other than you are now in BC and I think doing like early childhood education things.
Yeah.
So Carolyn, fill me in on your life.
Yeah, let me just tell you my life story, right? Yeah, so yeah, I pulled the lone wolf move and went to a different high school than everybody else that we knew in middle school. And then I went to the University of Waterloo and did a bachelor's in psychology there. And I stuck around, did a master's in psychology there, and then I moved out here and am doing a PhD in developmental psychology. And I'm like just about to finish that in approximately a month and a half.
Oh hell yeah!
Yeah, it's pretty
How's
exciting.
progression on that in the COVID years?
You know
Can't
what?
imagine it's too terribly different. I don't know much about getting a PhD, so maybe let's start there.
Yeah. Well, so there was a huge potential for it to be totally not great.
Mhm.
But that is not what happened. And in fact, I am probably one of the very few lucky people that has ended up like net positive with COVID happening, which is very weird. So I spent, oh goodness, about 4.5 years collecting data, which like when you're studying kids, like it's a lot harder to do online. People are being very creative and finding ways to do it, but it's a lot harder.
Mm.
So I would do most of my recruitment with kids like in person, and we finished that in December. And then I had to like really get down to writing the dissertation part of it. And then that's when COVID hit. And so I was really lucky that I didn't need to like keep studying kids in person by that point. I
Mm.
was just writing things. I was really lucky. I was funded during my PhD, and because COVID hit, they actually offered me an extension on my funding that I was able to take. So I was supposed to finish in August, but now I can finish in December. So I
Gotcha.
actually got like extra money out of this. It's like the weirdest thing. I've had time to like really like get into the writing of projects that I've kind of had on my plate for a while. Yeah, it's also allowed, like I'm going to be starting a postdoctoral position in January, and it's allowed me to like join that lab early because everything's happening online anyway.
Mm.
So even though I'm not physically there, I can like still be part of the group. So
Nice.
it's, in a funny way, it's actually worked out really well, and I'm really happy about that.
Well, that's fantastic to hear.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's very different than a lot of people's experiences, and so it's always challenging when I like talk to people about it. I'm like, you know what, I think we all need a little positivity right now,
for sure.
so here.
That's why I'm doing this thing. We just have
Exactly.
these nice, pleasant conversations.
Nice, that's great.
uh, so I guess rewinding it back a little bit,
Yeah.
how were your high school years? Any fun things from that era? Or was it just like book learning and showing up to class.
Yeah. What did I do in high school? I was a music nerd. Like that was my life.
Yeah.
Like president of the band council, creator of the band council. Like we're
Ooh.
talking that was
You were making
my
moves
life.
at such a young age.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure I spent like all of my hours outside of school doing music. And a lot of my hours inside of school doing music. Like I took private lessons, I was in community bands, I was on like the boards of those community bands. Like I got really
really
into
getting that
it.
wrap up on those music streets.
Yeah, I don't know. It was that was my life for a while. It was great. I absolutely loved it. I was able to develop like a lot of leadership skills that I didn't like anticipate having to develop, but I'm so glad I had the chance to develop. Probably something I would not have got if I had to do music with my mom all the time, because like favoritism, you know.
Yeah.
I was always like really worried about that, but I don't know. She's a great person. I don't think that would have ever been an issue. Yeah. Other than that, like I don't know. I didn't do that much in high school apart from like my work.
Fair enough.
I was just obsessed with band.
And then, so I guess transitioning into university then, was like something music focused one of like your things you were considering, or was it always just going to be like that thing you did as a passion and then you would do something more rigorous academically?
Yeah, in my like grade 12 year, I like really struggled with that question a lot because music was something that I absolutely loved and I found like a really great community and I'm like, wow, this is awesome. But I hated practicing. And that's kind of a problem if you want to go into music.
Yeah.
And so even though I was feeling really good about my skills and I, was told by people that like, yeah, if you really want this, like you can work towards it, it's something you can do. I said, yeah, but I'm not sure that I really want to work towards it that hard. And so I decided instead to go into psychology, which is not necessarily the place that you should go if you're like, yeah, I want to have like all these great academic pursuits. That's not usually why people go into psychology. It's more like, I'm interested in people or I want to learn to help people or something. But I very quickly turned into the person who was like, oh my goodness, this is so like intellectually interesting. And then it just kind of took over my life from there. I think about my second year of undergrad, I got involved in like research labs and I just never left. It was so much fun and just like really rewarding in a way that music was, but not in the same way.
Yeah.
So yeah, turned around a little bit from there. Yeah.
So going through those university years then,
okay, well I was still involved in music. I will say I didn't just like drop it
abandon it completely.
I didn't do that until a couple of years ago and I still kind of feel bad about that. There's other things that kind of went into that. Sure. But I kept up a lot of my community music on the side. But I also like I had a bit of a different university experience than a lot of people because like I stayed at home, right? Like I saved so much money and I am very happy about that now. But it was definitely a weird experience, like staying at home and then just kind of going out for classes. I didn't have a lot of the social experience that a lot of people have, like living in res or joining lots of clubs or anything like that.
I am right there with you. Up until I went back to finish my degree, I did no club activities outside of like the occasional Magic the Gathering night on campus.
Yeah, well, it's so tough because like university is such a big place, and especially in undergrad where you have like these huge classes without a lot of structures to like meet people and make like meaningful connections. It's tough. It's a very weird thing to just be like thrown into after years of having like very structured time where like you have the same classes.
Or at the very least, classes that you see with the same people over and over again. People weren't like particularly keen on skipping classes in high school. Well, most people that I went to school with.
Yeah.
So like you got to see them every day. And it was, it was easy to just be like, okay, well, this is an ordeal we're going to get through together. But like, in university, you get split up into different sections. Like there's a
Mm-hmm.
million people. You
Mm-hmm.
go to like different seats every time if you ever go to class.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
Like,
now that it's
it's a whole
online,
different
like it's
world.
even weirder for students
Oh, I
because they
can't
don't
even
even get to see
imagine.
each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a strange thing. That's like part of my job now is that I mentor a lot of undergraduate students through my research lab.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I really encourage, both in the students I mentor and, to be honest, like any student I interact with ever, I say, like, get involved in something, like find your people, because your experience is going to change so much once you find a group of people that you like really click with, who are like interested in the same questions as you, who share like the same life philosophy as you. Like, it's such a powerful experience that just like completely changes how you like approach the world.
Like,
And I think that's the kind of thing I got it a little bit once I joined research labs, and then I got it a bit once I met like a social community outside of school here in Vancouver, and that both of those were like very transformative in that way. But like nobody told me to do that, so I
mhm.
try to break that, and I now tell people to do
Yeah.
that. Pass on the wisdom.
That was pretty much the experience I had when I first like went to a school club. I guess the only club I went to was the improv club, and
Yeah, very
like,
your style.
yeah, very much like I walk in, I'm just like, oh yes, this is where I should have been ages
Yeah,
ago. And
exactly.
yeah, it was hard as like a person who was very like timid and has stage fright to like go to an improv club, but once you
Yeah.
overcome that, life gets a little easier.
You know what though? I loved improv. I mean, I probably wouldn't do it as much now
Mhm.
because I don't know. Maybe I should. Who knows? But like I was like involved in drama, I think in about grade 9.
Mhm.
I really got into it. I was at an art school. It was a time to like take risks, like whatever. And I found that I learned a lot about just like self-presentation. It's one of those things, like, you know how everyone tells you like dress for the job you want, or like those kinds of just like life mantras about
Yeah.
like present yourself as the person you want to be seen as. uh, that kind of experience of just having to do it, being in drama, taking improv and just having to think on the fly, taught me a lot about that. That's actually really helped, because like I'm also the kind of person who's not like not extroverted. I'm very comfortable just like working in my kitchen during COVID. It's totally fine. But I found that those kind of experiences that like push you a little bit and show you that like, yeah, you can do this. Like
Mhm.
you can hold a conversation with people on random topics, and you can like present yourself as a person and people will believe it. Like that was really valuable.
100%.
That's the life advice we should be teaching people, right?
Yeah, like we got to spread that message more aggressively.
All right,
Just
let's do it,
as
Chris. Let's do
yeah,
it.
it's up to us. Right, we start right now, right here.
Great. You heard it here first.
Even though anyone listening to this probably like the same age as us and no longer
Yeah,
in
okay, that's
university.
probably true. It's probably people we already know.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
um, so what was it about psychology that like really, like any particular inciting event in your studies that like really made it click and
Huh.
spark this new passion in you?
Yeah. Um, yeah, yes and no. So there was always a part of me that was like really interested in how people work. Like, why do people do the things that they do? Why are humans so different than like other animals? Like, what allowed us to figure out science in
Mhm.
general? Like, what goes on? Why are kids so weird? Like, I have a lot of these like very general questions about like what goes on in people's minds. And then I also came from a family that really valued education.
Mhm.
And so I was also really interested in like, well, how does learning happen? How can we make learning better for people? And so these were always things that like in the back of my mind were going on. And then I started to learn about things like in high school, like, oh yeah, this is what people in psychology study. I was like, cool, I could like do that sometime in the future. And then like in university, I took some classes in first and second year that were like, yeah, this is what people study. But then I think the more specific experience is as soon as I joined my first research lab, that really allowed me to like figure out exactly what I was interested in compared to just like these very broad
Mhm.
questions of like how do people learn. and start to really narrow down like, well, what is it that I'm going to do specifically? What are the like really narrow questions that I'm going to answer? And then how do they relate back to these like big questions that like maybe we'll never answer? So that was kind of like the first thing. But then the thing is, like, I've worked in multiple different research labs since then, and each of those kind of tailored and shaped the way that I think about my science moving forward. And so it's not necessarily there's like one thing that was like, yes, this was the event in my life that made me wonder, why do kids do stupid things? Like, no, there were just like a series of really good mentors and opportunities that allowed me to like test out different questions and find out what I was interested in. And I'm sure I will still have more of those experiences in the future, and it'll keep changing, which is part of why I love this field. Yeah, it's a nice way to think about life, is like you're never at the end, right? Like you're always building on new skills. Yeah, getting new experiences, discovering new things, and like you yourself change, and maybe your values shift, or I don't know, whatever. So it's just it's always a journey, and it's lots of fun.
What would you say are some of like the favorite things that you've learned in your studies or your research?
Well, one of the first things I learned in my like developmental psychology courses is that kids are actually really, really smart. I think that's one of the things that our field in general has to like keep convincing people over and over and over again. They're smart in like really sophisticated ways too. So like I have a study that I'm like in the process of writing up right now, where we ask kids to basically like be managers. So they're like asked to divide tasks among people, and the idea is like that's something that we have to do as adults all the time. It's like, okay,
and a lot of adults struggle with.
Exactly. It's like, okay, I'll like clean the bathroom and you do the dishes. Like we have to divide up labor in a way that's fair. You have to do it all the time in like group projects. I mean, it's the kind of thing that like the CEO of a company has to decide like who to promote into a new position based on their skill set, like all of that kind of stuff. And we're basically finding that like 5-year-olds get it. Like they understand the basic principles of like, if somebody's really good at something, then they should do like the more difficult tasks because they're more capable. It's stuff like that. When you think about it as being like this really sophisticated skill, you're like, yeah, there's no way that a kid could do that. We're finding like, yeah, they can. Or like my lab more broadly studies a lot of like early mathematical reasoning. And so we find that like kids might not know the numbers for things, but they can understand numerical information in the world. Like they know which plate has more cookies on it. That's vital information for a child. You know which one has the most cookies because you're going to go for that one over another one. And so there's all that kind of like understanding about the world that contributes to the way you learn. And we have that like super early on. And I think that's something that is really useful, especially for people who like don't have a lot of experience with kids. Like if you're a new parent or something, you might be looking and be like, it's a thing that sleeps and poops and eats and cries. But it's not. I mean, it is, but it's also
it
like
contains multitudes.
Yeah, like babies have personalities. Like sometimes babies are really easy to calm down, and sometimes they're a little feisty. You know, the infant understands the basic sounds of the language that its mother was speaking when it's in utero. Like there are so many cool things that you like just wouldn't expect. And so I feel like that, especially like early in my foray into psychology, was like really interesting to learn about. And I still find that stuff fascinating, and I still love to share it with people, and I try not to do it too much because it gets a little overwhelming.
What is the scope of, I guess, like, well, I guess the age range of the data that you collect?
So I work mostly with kids in preschool and into like early elementary school years. So most of my studies go from about age 3 to age 9 is typically what I work with.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so the reason for that is there's a lot that changes during those years, especially with respect to like their social understanding. Because like age 3, especially here in Canada, like that's when kids often start going to like daycares and preschools. Age 5 is typically when they start kindergarten, and so that's when they're going to get like formal education with like a curriculum and everything like that. And so we see lots of really interesting changes in their language development, in the way that they interact with other people, in their learning of like science and math. But I study more of the like the mechanisms in the mind that allow those changes to happen, and the way that learning more broadly exists. And so it's a super interesting age range to look at, because there's so much happening. There's so many new experiences that are happening all at once. So yeah, that's mostly those ages. Also, it's just so much fun. The conversations that I have with kids when I am like out testing in the community are just like absolutely fantastic. Here's one example that I absolutely love. A couple of years ago, I was trying to understand like what children think it means to be an expert in something. Like a lot of my research has to do with like how people think about abilities, or like their own capabilities, or like what they're sure about, what they're not sure about. And so I was like, okay, kid, probably about 6 years old, what does it mean to be an expert? And the kid's like, oh, I know. An expert is someone who can finish a whole game of Settlers of Catan.
Nice.
I thought, you're right. That is a very challenging thing to do. So, yeah. That's what I get to do in my job.
Experts are defined by people who don't get screwed over by the robber and flip the board over in a fit of rage.
Yeah, it's kind of tough. I can turn into that person sometimes. My partner has like an app that you can play Catan with like computers. Yeah. And we both use that a lot. And so we've learned like all the computer strategies, and we're not like very nice players because it's a computer, like you can't keep nice.
Yeah, it has
Problem
no emotion.
is, as soon as you bring it to like real people and you're like, okay, well give me like a 2-for-1 trade. They're like, no, that's ridiculous. And then I get like really bitter because all my strategies don't work because like humans are not the same as computers. So yeah.
For now.
Yeah, if my research keeps going the way it will, we might get to a point where things change in that respect. Yeah.
For sure. So yeah, I didn't even realize that you went to Waterloo.
Yeah, I did. 5 years.
Could have hung out. Probably should have seen each other at least once. Maybe not.
Probably. What was your program at Waterloo?
It was math for the first 2/2.5 years, and then I pivoted into econ.
Nice. Yeah.
Well, I had to take like an intro to psych class in like my 3rd and 4th year just to get like breadth requirements. I don't remember.
Oh, okay.
I don't think I went to, because like the thing about psych classes at Waterloo is that most of them are 8 in the morning, and I had to bus in from Kitchener. Just like, well, we're gonna not go to that. We're gonna Google who Stanley Milgram is, and that'll be fine.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I found in undergrad, and like now that I'm thinking about like what are my philosophies going to be as a teacher, something that I don't particularly like is that like I'm just going to teach from the textbook, or like I'm going to teach you information that you could just like look up yourself.
Yeah,
I feel like no, as a professor, like you should provide something that is more than that, a reason that you are giving that information and not just assigning a textbook.
Give it some flavor. Don't just feed them academic gruel.
Yeah. But then the irony though is that most of the skills that I've had to learn since I like stopped taking courses, like I have to learn them myself. And so having those skills of like knowing how to really quickly read a textbook because the exam is tomorrow, and like learning how to Google things effectively, turns out those are really useful skills for a lot of different things in the future, right? Yeah. So, I mean, that's what I tell most of my students now. Like, if they're worried, like, oh no, COVID means all my classes are online. I'm like, yeah, but you know what? A lot of the learning you're going to have to do in the future is going to revolve around teaching yourself things from online materials. So, take advantage of it now.
Just 5-head move. You're already ahead of the curve compared to where the previous generation of university students is. You're already at the computer, just go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like especially people who grew up with computers just being everywhere, like there's going to be a super interesting thing as like people our age and younger especially start entering the workforce. And I feel like there's a lot faster learning that we can do because we've learned how to figure out things very quickly and how to find information very quickly. I think that's going to be really, really fun to watch.
Oh yeah, we live in an accelerated time.
And which is actually, it's weird because like we now need to tell ourselves to like slow down. Like it's okay to relax. It's okay to not work all the time. It's okay to like sometimes take an afternoon and just be a little slow about
it. Yeah.
myself that.
I hope my boss isn't listening to this because I'm gonna say something that'll like get me in trouble. But like yesterday at work, I like sprinted through my morning and got super burnt out at around lunchtime. So I was just like, okay, I'm gonna play a video game at lunch with my friends that have more flexible work schedules, and then I'm gonna take a nap, and then I'm gonna get off at my normal time. And you know, objectively speaking, I got my work done. So like, if they look at metrics, they'll be like, well, it was there. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
No, exactly.
But yeah, just it was very much needed midday break for sure.
Yeah, that's one of the things actually I've been finding. So because COVID made me work at home and because I was already kind of naturally the process of finishing my degree, there's a nice like transition point that allowed me to test out a different like lifestyle almost. And so I used to be the kind of person who like I would only write my papers when like inspiration struck and I would just like go for hours and it was not particularly healthy. Like yeah, it got done, but I'm pretty sure my mental health was suffering as a result because I was just pushing myself so hard and I would feel guilty if I wasn't working during hours and I'd be really motivated by deadlines. Well, I'm still motivated by deadlines. Who isn't?
Oh yeah.
But what I found is that like I set aside times and I said, these are my working hours. This is a way to structure my time. And I'm not going to feel guilty if I'm not working in the evenings. That's because it's not work time. It's time to eat. It's time to socialize. It's time to relax. And I found that like I am way happier in general because of it, because I actually have time to recharge. I'm more productive with the tasks I do spend my time on because I'm not like exhausted the whole time. And in fact, this past week was the first time probably since lockdown started that I actually started feeling a lot of those like burnout feelings. And it's because I worked last weekend. And I thought like, this is exactly why you need to take breaks. It's important for your productivity to not work all the time. Yeah. So I support people who do research in that, like morally. Can they please tell us what the optimal work schedule is? And then I'll follow that.
Very good. If you find that paper, send it to me because I need to forward that to my managers.
Nice. I feel like it's probably already done and I just am not aware of it. That's how most things happen in science in general.
Yeah, there's like that 4-day work week book that I'm sure people have put up somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
So outside of the scope of work/research/academia, how have your hobbies developed over the past while?
Yeah, well, I guess I've told you already that in high school and even in my like undergrad days, I did a lot of music things. So I was involved in community bands primarily, which was super awesome. I absolutely loved it. There was like a community. I mean, that's why it's called that. But there are a group of people that I really identified with and were really wonderful. And so that was where I spent most of my time when I was in Kitchener-Waterloo. But when my partner and I moved here for me to start my PhD, it was very different. There isn't quite the same musical community in Vancouver that we found as there was. there's something in the water in
Yeah,
the Kitchener
kind of
area.
surprising to me.
Yeah, it is. There were just a lot more opportunities for community music there, and the people who were in them were lovely.
Mhm.
Maybe it's because I knew a lot of people growing up, because like my parents were always very involved in community music. And so I just kind of like grew accustomed to those people. And maybe the people here are equally as lovely, and I just am not accustomed to them as much. I don't know. Maybe it's something like that. But we kind of explored a couple of different community music organizations out here. We just couldn't find that like same sense of community. So that hobby kind of dropped off. But instead, I picked up lots of other things. One hobby that's like maybe not so great, but is still great. You can see my like wine collection. So the podcast people will have to imagine
Yes.
several bottles of wine in my kitchen.
neatly lined up on a counter, and
Yes.
you could take that mental image and do with it what you will.
So of course, like BC is kind of known for its wine. So every summer I go usually once, possibly twice, out to the Okanagan and bring back more wine than I anticipated, because you get in this mindset when you're there, you're like, oh, I have to get it all. I won't be able to get this in town. It's a limited resource. And you come back and you find it in like all the shops, and you're like, well, it worked. Their marketing technique worked on me. So that's one. I don't know if I'd call it a hobby, but thing.
It's a thing you do. It's a thing you do.
Thing I do. I've also gotten really into gardening, which makes me sound like an old lady, but I love it. I love like taking care of plants. We grow a lot of like different herbs and stuff. So we have like basil outside and rosemary and thyme. So it also feels very productive, because you're like, I can eat this.
Yes.
And it's really satisfying if you have a recipe and you're like, it calls for fresh rosemary. I have that.
Just run out and get it.
Yeah.
None of this ground up dry stuff that's in a container. You don't know how long it's been there at this point anymore. It's just kind of in the back of the cupboard.
And it looks like yellow, and you're like, why is the rosemary yellow? That's not what color it is when it's growing. Yeah, so I've been doing that for a couple of years now. We have like some little planters outside. And what's really rewarding about it is like when people come over, they're like, "Ooh, these are great plants." And then I'll find out that like they started their own little garden after. I'm just like, oh, this is so great, like spreading the joy of taking care of plants.
You said it makes you feel like saying it makes you feel like an old lady. There's actually like quite a few people that I've had on thus far that have all like, whether or not it was like brought on by COVID or not, like they're all growing their own stuff. I'm just like, man, that's incredible. You're prepared
really
for the apocalypse.
Yeah. I think the other thing is there are some plants that are, they're just like very responsive. So like they'll tell you when they need more water, or they'll tell you if it has like, if there's too much sun or something. And so it's really fun, because you can learn on the go. So plants like basil, for example, they're really good at like giving you visual signs that like something is wrong. And so it's really easy to like train yourself. And of course there's like tons of good online resources too that are like, if your basil looks like this, like move it to a shadier spot, or like, you know, whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
So it's like a really great like opportunity to teach yourself new skills and like take care of something, which I feel like for people in our age group is like a very real skill that is looming in the future for many people.
As someone who like grew up with minimal pets and like didn't have a garden, like the responsibility I have to take care of something other than myself, and even to extent take care of myself, is just like not present.
Yeah, I mean, hey, that's a skill in and of itself, taking care of yourself and learning what your own like symptoms are. Like there, a couple of years ago, I discovered, and like I should not have had to discover this, but I discovered that I would get really tired in the afternoon if I hadn't had any water to drink the whole day. I thought like, that's funny. That's what my plants do. They like droop when they've had no water. Turns out I'm just another version of this plant. Like. Useful insight right there.
Famously 50% plant DNA, Carolyn Baer.
There you go. That's what I'm going to be known for. Thanks.
Yeah, not a problem. Just a quick thought that I had before starting this that
Yeah.
was like on my mind most of the morning. I don't think I ever called you Care Bear at any time. Is that a nickname that other people have put toward you? And how do you react to it every time?
Yeah, it is. So I think my first experience with that was maybe in like elementary school sometime. And it was this, like young boy in the class. And he's like, oh my goodness, guess what I just discovered? Your name is Care Bear. And I thought like, oh no. I was so offended by it. This is like, I don't know, grade 3. Carolyn
And
was
then
just
you
like,
you just glare into their soul, give them the Care Bear
yeah.
stare.
Exactly. I just thought like, no, I will never. And then I don't know, a few years later, I'm not exactly sure when, it just happened that a lot of people would kind of just be like, oh, I just realized. And I'm like, yeah, good for you.
Yeah,
Like,
I that
I've
that was
also
my
realized.
that was how I felt this morning. I was like, I'm like washing
Yeah.
my hands, just like, why am I thinking about this? So I felt the need to bring it up instead of just leaving
That's
it
funny.
alone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I now embrace it. Like, I think
Oh hell
it's
yeah.
part of my like Instagram and possibly also my like Twitter handle. Like, why not? It's catchy. It's cute.
Yeah, for sure.
It's fine. I usually like nicknames like that. I'll never like introduce myself with a
Oh,
nickname,
for
but
sure.
I'm also like, look, if someone wants to give me one, like that's fine. Like that's usually a thing that just happens in relationships when you're good friends with someone or something. Like,
Oh yeah.
sure. If it happens, it happens. If it's a weird nickname, then like maybe not. But I haven't had any of those, so that's good.
Solid. Always hate having a weird nickname. You don't want to be someone with a
Yeah.
weird nickname.
I don't know. I feel like our class in like middle school was like really big into the nickname game. Um,
I only ever called Nick Whiffy. That's the only
yeah,
nickname I had because that was
yeah,
just a fun spin on
exactly.
his last name.
I know it took me years to like readjust to think about him as not being just his nickname.
Yeah.
Same with like Thomas Ellis was always just Tellis.
Tellus.
And
Yeah.
it took years for me to like readjust that in my mind. I would like see posts by all these people on Facebook and be like, people are commenting with their first names. Like, and I realized like, oh yeah, they probably like don't want everyone to call them by their nickname that they had in middle
Show
school.
up to an interview. So tell me, Tellus.
Yeah, right.
A little weird.
Understandable why you might want to change that going forward. Yeah, I never had that problem, which is okay. I'm okay with that.
So you mentioned you have a partner. How did y'all meet?
Oh my god. Okay, it's kind of embarrassing. It's embarrassing for me. Lots of
Gotcha.
people say it's cute. I don't know. I'll let you be the judge of that. So, okay. So the story has to begin when I broke up with my like long-term boyfriend before
Mhm.
that, who I like met in high school, and we dated most of my university years. It's kind of rough. First, like, major breakup that like wrecked me inside.
Mhm.
So that's when I moved out to Vancouver. And this was in my like third year of undergrad this summer. It was awesome. I got to like feel like my own person, have new experiences, really just like change my life around. And
Just
it was,
independent woman living.
yeah, it was such a good experience for me that summer. So I was part of community band this whole time back in Kitchener, but not in Vancouver. So I went back to my community band when I came back for my fourth year of undergrad. And in my absence, there was this new guy that joined. Now, some context. My family was all over this community band. Like, my sister was in it. My parents were both in it. In fact, they met in this community band.
It's a long
Most of my
history.
most of my friends were in it. My ex-boyfriend was in it. Like, we're talking like a lot of my world was concentrated in this
It's
community
basically an extended family at that point.
band. Exactly. Oh, it totally is an extended family. So I come back and this new guy is there, and he is like elbowing his friend, and he's like, "Who's the new girl?" And he's like, "Oh, that's Carolyn." He doesn't know that like I'm on the board of executives. I'm the section leader.
Like you're not the new one, he's the new one.
Oh yeah. And so I guess I didn't know this at the time because, you know, I had my whole community in this band. I didn't need to like focus on the new guy that had joined. And so he's like at the back, he's playing percussion. He's actually like a trained musician, and he joined this just like for fun, not because he like needed a musical outlet or anything. So he's at the back just like playing percussion for fun. And so he can see me, but like I can't really see him a lot. And so I guess like throughout the year, he was like, oh, maybe I should like go talk to her. Maybe I should like infiltrate her friend group. Like, I don't know, something like that.
The classic male perspective on how to approach a woman.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't really sell his social skills. He's actually very good socially, but this isn't really selling that. So basically what happened is come the next summer, I decided to go back to Vancouver for another 4-month thing. And he just hears like she's moving to Vancouver, and he's like, gotta make my move. It's time, let's go. And so like we go on a couple of dates, and I'm like, you know, I'm like moving to Vancouver soon, and like don't want to get serious. But no, he was insistent. He was like, okay, well, we'll just like keep talking as you're gone. But he stayed in this community band with my family and like talked to them every week and like wormed his way into their hearts. Wormed his way into my friend group. And just like everyone loved him because he's that kind of person. And I'm like here in Vancouver, and my roommates are like, so, you know, what's going on? What's new in your life? I'm like, well, there's this like guy I'm talking to. And they're like, there's a guy you're talking to. I'm like, oh, it's not like that. And like 2 months later, I'm like, okay, fine, you're right. It's like that. And so we like started dating at that point. And then eventually he moved out here to support me as I'm doing my PhD. And he does super exciting stuff. He's been doing lots of cool projects out here too. But yeah, so that's there's a lot of things in there that I'm like, yeah, well, that happened. I never anticipated that I would meet a partner the same way my parents did, but here we are. So yeah, that's the story.
Time is cyclical. It just happens from generation to generation.
Yeah, well, I feel like it's more like a property of the fact that like you meet people through common interests or through mutual connections, right? Like that's how a lot of people meet, and you tend to like the people that share your interests or that are part of your social group. And so if you have the same social group as your parents, then yeah, maybe it's inevitable that you'll meet someone there.
That is a very sweet story. Nothing to be embarrassed about. That is my judgment. And
all right, thank you for providing the verdict on that.
No problem. I feel like I'm a pretty good arbiter about these kinds of things.
All right, excellent. If I ever hear any stories where people are like, yeah, I don't, is this a good thing or not? I'll be like, hey, I've got the person for you.
Hell yeah.
Nice. So I feel like I know that most of the time you tend to like say the same thing. Like I've listened to a bunch of your podcasts because I'm like a little obsessed.
Thank you.
But I know I don't want to like ask you all the questions that like people have asked you before, because I'm like, does everyone want to hear again like what you do for work? Like I already know, I already listened to all these things. But I'm really curious now that we're talking about like just in general life things. Like I want to know how you are, Chris. Like how are you doing?
My last few days I've been kind of struggling. I'm just like in a malaise. I am moving next week to like a different place, so like maybe change of scenery and like different things that I'm allowed to do will make me feel better. Because like currently I'm in a Discord with a bunch of people, and they all play Valorant, and they start playing at like 10 p.m.
Nice.
I live in a house where like the walls are paper thin, and like we're all super close, where if I'm on a mic being loud at 10 p.m., it's gonna disturb some people. But we're moving to a bigger place where that hopefully is less of an issue, and I get to like talk with my friends again, just as I would very much desire to. Let's see, what else? I've been thinking lately about the girl that I'm seeing, in a way. So she also listens to this podcast, so I'm like,
You don't want to spoil all your secrets.
I'm like kind of uncomfortable disclosing things. But
fair.
I'll go for it anyways. It's fine.
I
She
asked for the record.
Yes. On like one of our earlier dates, and like in an attempt to sort of set up like how we view this relationship. It was say that she did not see this as like a romantic relationship. I'm just like, okay, that was different from how I felt about it. I'm just like, well, what do I do now? Do I hop back on the apps? Do I keep searching? Do I just kind of stick around, keep doing whatever this is? So that's something I've been dealing with lately. And there's no real clear path. It's just kind of taking a guess, and then if things go terribly wrong, I get to learn from it. And if things go right, then that's a good outcome. But
yeah. Well, I think that when it comes to interpersonal relationships, like broadly speaking, I think that's what you have to do. You have to explore, like, how does it work if I tell somebody how I'm feeling? How does it work if I don't tell them how I'm feeling? What's the implication of that on this relationship? And like, those are things that in a lot of ways you have to test out, and they're going to be different with every person, and you're going to learn more about yourself along the way, and learn more about other people along the way and how to interact with them. And that's a good thing, right? Like that's the excitement of human life, is that you get to learn things along the way, and you remember the things you learn, and
for sure
learn, like, build upon them, I guess, in the future.
And just like fine. Generally speaking, I've had like a terrible go of just like handling rejection or failure in any way. I'm just like,
I think a lot of people do.
Yeah, it's never comfortable. I think that's like what sparked things for me academically to like take a break from university, where it's just like, well, I'm not failing classes, but they're certainly not going well.
Right. So that's a very mature realization, though. There are a lot of people who think that they have to push through something that isn't working for them because of whatever reason. My parents want me to. Society thinks that I should. I set this goal for myself when I was in kindergarten in like a time capsule. Like, things change. You change as a person. I think that's an important thing to realize, that, it's okay to change your mind, and it's okay to do something that makes your life better and makes you feel good.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's I've been on like a positivity binge lately, which is good. It's a little overdue, because like I also don't deal very well with rejection. It's tricky, because in the world of academia, we're constantly fielding rejections. Like, we have peer reviews come back on our papers, and they're like, this is not a good paper, and you think like, I worked really hard on that. Like, or there's limited spots in a program, or there's limited funding, or I could go on and on. And it's hard to deal with those kinds of things, especially when you see other people around you succeeding. You're like, oh my God, like, how did this person do so well on these things? And they're consistently doing well. The real story is, I guess there's a couple of things. One is that the more you try, like, the more applications you put out, the more just attempts you put out into the world, you're going to land some of them, and you're going to not land some of them. So if you put more out, you'll land more. But then also, like, having good people around you, like supportive people who are there to like catch you when you fall, and to like boost up your self-esteem, to connect you with opportunities you hadn't heard about. Like, those are all really important things to like help you through those rough spots. And I think that's something that like I've been really working on, like, within my own academic community, but I think a lot of the same principles apply a lot more broadly. So here's just like one example that we do a lot, and it's kind of fun, and you can like take this approach and do whatever you want with it. We have these like communities that get together on a regular basis. Now there's a lot that goes into these communities. It's super awesome. Like we have time that is like dedicated towards working just like silently over Zoom or something, just so that we have like an excuse to work without interruption. But then we also have this section of it that's like, we will edit someone else's writing for a period of time, and we all like cycle through who gets it, so that we all benefit from the editing. We all contribute to helping other people. But then we also have this like basically group therapy time where we all just like go around and we say like, you know, this is how my week went. Like I felt really burnt out this week, or I felt really productive this week. And we talk about like, okay, well, what does that mean for the work that you were doing? What does that mean for like how you were handling all of your other life stressors at the same time? How can that help other people in this group do well? But one of the things that is really fun about this group is we also have what's called a rejection collection. And so we literally just like track the number of times we get rejected. And then we have a party when we reach like 100. So I'm super excited. I'm part of like a couple groups that do this. We haven't quite reached 100 yet, but from the stories I've heard of other people in these groups who have done it, they like print out like rejections that happen on paper and like burn them ceremoniously.
It's a cathartic moment.
Yeah, it's just a way of saying like, look, rejection is a part of life. Why not make it a positive part of life rather than this thing that always has to like get you down? It's like, no, I have a rejection and it's contributing to our party. Just finding little ways like that to reframe it. I mean, you could also like at a easier, more universal level, you could also just be like, yeah, I've learned from this experience. Like that's a way of reframing it. But this seems more fun because there's like a party and cake.
Oh yeah, and who doesn't love a good party?
Yeah, exactly. I'm just saying, take that, do what you will with it. It's just a fun way because we all deal with rejection, so why not make it more fun?
I will store this anecdote in my mind palace for future reference.
You could totally just have like a list on the go of like the rejections you've had. Like, I don't know, your shopping list, but your rejections.
Just look at it every now and again and then rip it apart when you're through with it.
Yeah. Well, it's something that like, I've seen a couple of like really senior academics do this. They'll like, we have our like curriculum vitae, which is like all of the things you've accomplished. And then people will have like their like failure CV. That's just like, these are all the schools I didn't get accepted to. These are all the grants
Here's what I tried
rejected.
to do.
Yeah, and it's actually like it's really nice to see that, not because I want people to fail, but because you look at these people and you're like, they're such amazing people. But then you only see the good parts that they want to present to the world and that, you know, whatever, got the money. You don't always see the work and just the sheer amount of like effort and energy. Yeah. And so it's really nice to see that. I think that's probably one of the things that I've liked most about like going through the academic experience is really realizing that all of these colleagues that I have they're humans. Like some of them are super socially awkward and some of them are absolutely
in grad programs, socially awkward people, no way.
I know, what a revelation. But it's that kind of thing where you're like, I just always saw the brilliant part of them. I never saw the effort that it took to get there or the things that they've had challenges with. Like that's been really, really interesting and really helpful to see, because I think we often have these beliefs about people just based on like how they present themselves, and that's true not just for like academics, that's true for everybody. And I think it's really eye-opening once you can start to see behind the person that someone's projecting, and you can actually like see how they got there. Everyone has a story like that, and all of a sudden it kind of changes your perspective on like people in general. Like everyone, even the people you disagree with, have some story that got them there. And yeah, they've had to face lots of things, and some people might have faced more things than others, but everyone has those kinds of shared experiences of feeling rejected sometimes.
On like a more personal level, I think the hard part for me is just like the idea of turning thoughts into action or like some kind of effort. This podcast project was like the first thing in a while where I felt like that kind of initiative.
Yeah. And look
It's
how
turned out
successful
well,
it
and
is.
I'm glad it's turned out relatively well. Um,
Yeah.
just the first step of getting more accustomed to doing that sort of thing
Yeah.
in any field.
Yeah. Well, it's tricky, right? Like
Mm.
you can have lots of ideas. It's challenging to take those ideas and turn them into actionable items, right? Like that takes, it's a risk, right? It's a risk you have
Oh
to
yeah.
take. Like depending on what it is that you're doing, there might be more risks, and depending on who you are, some of those things might be more risky than others. So absolutely, I can understand why like you might have great ideas and be like, well, but I don't know if the idea is worth the risk given who I am and where I am and what resources I have access to, like all of that
Mm.
kind of stuff. I will say though, one of the things that I've discovered over maybe like the last month or so, so because I'm like at the end of my degree and COVID hit, I'm kind of looking out at the world and saying like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with my life? Like I never really thought about it, but now there's like a big question in the air of like, well, where do I go from here? And I thought like, well, everyone tells you should like reach out to people and just ask them, like reach out to people who have the same experience as you and just ask them what they did, or reach out to people who have jobs you like. And I thought like, I am not that socially brave. Like that's not me. But then I did it. It took,
Mm.
like 3 hours to write an email and like just hover over the send button for like another 2 hours. Cause I'm like,
Yeah.
I can't do it. I can't. And it turned
Just
out really well.
just hit the
Like,
spell check like 5 times to make sure that everything is correct, so that you don't look like an
yep.
idiot in this email.
Yeah, and then you like change 2 words, and then you're like, no, that was bad, and you change them back, and you're like, okay, now I have to read it 3 more times to
Yeah.
make. I'm like, yeah, absolutely, definitely, I am that kind of person. But the thing is, once I actually pressed send, it was totally fine. Like I found a lot of positive responses from people, and like I didn't expect it at all. I
Mm.
expected people to be like very guarded about their experience, or to be like, I'm too busy for you, so sorry. But no, I didn't find that. I found that people were instead like very willing to talk about their experience and to provide advice. Like who doesn't love giving advice? It's like it's a great experience to
Mm.
feel like you have something that somebody else
my,
wants,
my
right?
my favorite is giving advice on situations that I have like theories on how to handle but have never actually encountered, and be like, this just makes sense to me. Here's my info for you.
Yeah. Well, you know what? There was a friend of mine at the University of Waterloo who did research on this kind of stuff, on like how people give advice. And like one of the things is that being an outsider in a situation often makes you give better
Mm-hmm.
advice. Like that's just the thing. And maybe sometimes it's because you've had that experience, and sometimes it's just because you're not in the heat of the situation. It doesn't really matter whether you've had the experience or not. You just have a different perspective that is useful in that moment.
Mm.
So there you go. There's some research to back up your experience.
Fantastic. Feel so justified in, in giving out advice now.
Nice.
Yeah. Just trying to think about how the show normally goes.
I know you always end with like all these different questions
Oh
that
yeah,
I don't know are like
I have some tricks up my sleeve. How long have we been at this? Pushing an hour. It's fine. The recording that I had last week that will be uploaded tomorrow was like 2 hours. It's just like, I should trim this down somehow. It's a
yeah, it's
fun.
okay. People can always put it on like double speed
Oh
if
yeah,
they've got other things to do.
I learned through like arranging people to appear that like some people watch the YouTube video only. I'm just like, oh, that's insane. To just like look at a video and just have it on when you can play it a little faster or something.
Well, but you can speed up
Because
YouTube videos too.
that's true. But also just like the bit rate required, like the download amount of a video file vastly outweighs a simple audio file. But anyways, that's enough about the back end of things. Um, Carolyn,
Yeah.
if you were to have a TED talk on any topic,
Oh God.
Just 5 minutes to get up in front of a group of people and talk about anything with whatever passion you have. What would that topic be?
Okay, I feel like this is like a little bit tricky because there's like an area of the world that I am an expert in. Like that's the point of getting a PhD. And so like I know lots of people in my field who have done TED Talks on like their topic.
Yeah.
So I mean I could see something like that one day in the future where like I can talk about like why, like what are the reasons within your mind that you believe things and don't believe other things? Because like that's what I study. I study like how, especially children, but more like humans in general, how we figure out what's true, what's likely in the world. And like that's a topic that I could see happening in like a TED Talk format because it's interesting when we're trying to figure out like why do people have ridiculous beliefs? Why do people like blindly trust some people? And why are some people like so stubborn that they will never revise their beliefs? Sometimes those are the same people.
I have a friend who's a big Trump guy, and I would like this TED Talk to exist now so I could just kind of like watch it alongside and be like, well, how do you feel about this presentation here?
Yeah, there's a couple of people, I don't think any, well, there might be, and I just haven't seen it, like on that specific topic, but there are a lot of people who study like very similar questions. They might just like put a different spin on it or something. But in general, the answer, the short answer, because obviously I'll have a TED Talk one day.
You'll have slides that people can read while you convey.
Yes, exactly. There'll be nice pictures of children thinking. I have lots of those pictures in the talks that I give.
Just a lot of stock photos of kids.
Oh, totally. That's the best part of doing developmental work. I can put pictures of kids on all my presentations. Yeah, so the short answer is that most humans actually use the same tools to figure out what's true from what's false. It's not that I have a different way of reasoning than someone else does. It's more that we use that same reasoning process with our different experiences and with our different values and priorities in life. So you can sometimes have the same experience, but you yourself might value one factor over another factor. And that leads to a belief that is different. Sometimes you have different experiences, even if you have the same values, and that leads to a difference in beliefs later on. But like fundamentally, we have the same machinery effectively.
It just processes different information or the same information in a different way.
Yeah. And like a lot of my research is trying to argue that we actually have most of that machinery very young. And we sometimes think about kids as like not being very good at telling the truth. And like they aren't necessarily, like they're pretty gullible in a lot of situations. Sometimes they think that they can do things that they very clearly cannot do. And so you're like, how did you come to that belief? But in fact, basically what we find is like, no, they have a lot of the same machinery. It operates in many of the same ways. There are changes that happen, but the core structures seem to be there very early. It's just that the experiences and the values that kids have are different, and that changes the way that that machinery operates. And sometimes it's great because generally speaking, kids are going to be exposed to people who know a lot more than them. So it makes sense to trust people a lot of the time. But sometimes it goes the other direction, and then they're gullible and they're believing things that they shouldn't. And that's just a consequence of what's otherwise a pretty good system. Yeah. The other thing though, I was thinking, and I might talk about this later, because I know that you usually ask people to plug things at the end. So save all the content later. But I have also been on this. Yeah. I have also been on this like happy, like productive, positive mind change in my life lately, which has been really good. It's been really beneficial. And so even though that's not like what I study, that's a thing that like I'm really excited about and I really want to share with other people. And so from the perspective of like, you know, what's something that you want to like share with the world, I'm like, well, there's also that. So yeah, those are my two answers. Perfect. 2 TED Talks.
Very good. This will offset the people who didn't have an answer. We'll average out to
Okay.
about
Yeah,
one TED
I'll
Talk
give
per
2
episode.
answers. Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect.
You're covering for someone.
Nice.
Hmm. So given the sort of paradigm shift of online learning for
Hmm.
people, especially in like their developmental years,
Yeah.
um, have you thought about like sort of research projects uh, tackling that sort of uh, I want to say a different word other than topic, but topic's the only word I can think of right now. Or are you cognitively aware of like other research projects that have started on that sort of
On like online
change?
learning?
Just like
Or more generally like the online experience?
yeah, the online experience versus like the way we grew up in like grade school with people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that. I'm working on a project with one of my supervisors right now, looking at how children's social skills may or may not be affected by not being physically around their peers as often.
Mhm.
So we basically are just asking questions, this giant slew,
Yeah.
or asking this giant slew of questions to parents of children who are within like a certain age range. And we're saying like, what's changed? Is your kid super weird now? Does your kid talk to plants? Like, I don't know, like maybe
No question is too ridiculous to ask because we just don't know until we do.
yeah, I think there's there's a lot that has changed, and a lot, especially early on, people were really worried about it. They're like, oh my goodness, like our children are going to be deprived. We are going to be deprived. We have to have Zoom happy hours all the time. And like, yeah, you're right that like humans need social interaction, but humans are also very resourceful. And so one of the things I'm really excited about in this project is we're including asking questions about like substitutes for social interaction that people might have. So
Ooh.
like talking to plants. Um, or like it could be other things too. It could be like they might have more pretend play. So like they are talking to imaginary friends or something like that. Because I think that's one of the things that like humans can do, right? Like we don't have to have a person there to like talk. We can practice our speeches in front of the mirror, right? Like there's a lot of things like that we can do. The question is that kind of interaction going to give you the same things that an in-person human interaction does? And then the other thing is like, well, you can talk to people over Zoom or other media things. Does that have the same benefits as talking to people in person? A lot of people anecdotally feel like, no, it's not the same because you're missing a lot of the like the body cues, which like a lot of our understanding of communication comes from these extra cues. I'm like overly gesturing right
these
now to
nonverbal
illustrate this
things.
point.
Any sort of nonverbal communication.
Yeah,
Very important.
exactly. And we're missing a lot of that. And we're also on this weird like time delay that makes it awkward because people talk over each other. And because you talk over each other, you then have a lot of awkward silences because you don't want to talk over each other. And that just like, how does that go into things? So there are a lot of people studying these kinds of questions right now.
It's a thing to do right now.
Oh
We're
yeah,
not gonna have as many chances to do this outside of what's happening currently.
yeah. Well, it's this thing that is affecting the world all at the same time. It's like the perfect case for like a lot of people to test these really interesting questions about like what are the fundamental ingredients of good social interaction, right? Like that's what these studies will answer for us, is like, well, is the important part that we are communicating with someone who has different thoughts than us? Because I can do that over Zoom the same way I can do that in person. Is it that you just need to talk? Because then I can talk to my imaginary friend and then I'm fine. Is it that you need like contingency? That's something we know is like really important for infants and children when they're learning. That like you will learn a lot better if whoever is trying to teach you is reacting to you. So learning from like a TV show is not going to be as effective as learning even from somebody like over Zoom, or in the study I'm thinking of, it was over Skype because it was a few years ago. And so like it could be that like contingency is a super important thing, or I don't know, there could be some other ingredient, or maybe it's a combination of ingredients. And one of the cool things is that this pandemic is allowing us to test those. And there's a whole bunch of money going into it because everyone's like, I don't know what's happening. I want my team to be productive. Throw money at researchers. And we're like, okay, we'll study that for you.
Yeah, thank you. Take it back.
Yeah. So the short answer to your question is there is a lot of research going on right now. There is a lot of research that like has already existed that gives us like some of the answers, but I'm expecting starting kind of about now, just because like research takes time to go through the peer review process and get published and blah, blah, blah. You'll start to see things now, probably for about another like 2 years at least, where like news will pick it up and they'll, you know, publicize a study that seems kind of cool and tells you something about like one specific part. But you'll see a lot of that coming up soon because it's on everybody's mind. And like researchers, just like everyone else, are panicking and want to find a way to contribute. And that's what we do. We study everything possible.
Excellent.
Yep.
So I know I think it's like the American Economic Association, they have like they have an annual issue where they have a section called like basically economic funny papers. Do those exist in the psychology world where it is tackling a sort of like comedic premise, but with like a very through the lens of like a very serious research? Alternatively, as a more succinct question, what is a paper that you enjoy from like a non like academic point of view?
Okay, so let me see if I've got your questions
I'm
right.
terrible with words.
No. This is real human communication,
yes.
Right? So are you asking for like a real scientific study that like seems funny, or are you asking for a study that pretends to be scientific but is just like comedy?
The latter.
Okay. I've seen, there's been like a couple of like funny Beaverton Onion style ones lately. I am completely blanking. There was one I saw like 2 days ago and it was hilarious, and now I can't remember what it was, and now I'm really sad about that.
That's all right. I'll get you to dig through your browser history and just see if you can find it that way after this.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it. Yeah, they've had a couple of those recently. I will say there are some like really hilarious studies that are like meant to be funny, but then are also like profound at the same time. Those I really love because like I'm a huge nerd. Like that's that's who I am. And so there's been a few of those that are just like really cool. So one, there's actually a whole award for this within our field. It's called the Egg Nobel Prize.
Oh, right.
So there was one that a couple of researchers at the University of Waterloo won a couple years ago on pseudo-profound bullshit. You can bleep that out if necessary, depending on your audience.
I definitely checked the box that's on YouTube that says, no, this was not made for kids. So we're good.
So the general idea of that paper was like, why do people believe things if they're presented in like fancy language? So what they did is they just used like a random generator of words that are like grammatical, but they're very like academic, highbrow words, and they actually meant nothing. And people rated them as being like very profound.
Oh, wow.
And they're just like, we literally just fed you garbage. And you said it was profound because it looked fancy.
Yeah.
And so they had like a catchy title. I think the title was something like "People Believe Pseudo Profound Bullshit." And they won this prize because everyone's like, haha, that's funny. You used a swear word in your title. And then they like looked at the paper and they're like, oh, that's actually kind of interesting. Why would people do that? So that's a particularly good one. Yeah. Also related to what I study. So, you know, I'm biased there.
It hits on several levels for you.
Yeah, exactly. I do think though, like science can be really funny. And I think a lot of people don't use that to their advantage well enough. It's one of my favorite things to do is just like put like small jokes, like funny examples in my papers. Like it's a scientific paper, but like one of, I think it's the second paper I ever published. It was my master's thesis. My whole first paragraph was about didgeridoos. Why? I don't know, because I thought it was funny. Like, it worked as like a device to convey what I was trying to talk about. It was also funny. I was like, this is great. My dissertation has like a couple Easter eggs in it for people who read it. It's great. Fantastic. I think people should do more of that.
Yeah.
Engage your readers. Right?
As someone who's like regular goal is to just like make someone laugh every day, that I could definitely get behind adding small little jokes or Easter eggs or anything everywhere that we do anything.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so fun to read that kind of stuff and to see, like, most academics put them in footnotes. Because most people don't read the footnotes. So it's like, only if you're really dedicated to this paper will you even see the joke. And then you still have to understand the joke after that. So yeah, there's some, I get really happy whenever I see those in papers. I feel like, yes, it was worth reading this one today.
10 out of 10.
Exactly.
Yeah, I am out of preset questions before plugs. Oh wait, the ultimate, or sorry, penultimate question that I like to ask everybody.
Yes.
Carolyn, if you were to host your own version of this show, as someone who listens, you already know what's coming up. Who would you like to have on as a guest?
Yeah, so this is my own version of like people in my
people
life,
in your life. It doesn't have to be anybody that I know in the slightest.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about this because I'm like, who would I reach out to? Because like I did this recently in a way, like I reached out to people who were like in my program and moved on to other careers, and like that was super useful, like for my career development. But now it's like, well, you know, who do I want to know what they've done with their life? Because like I can Facebook stalk people to the end of time. Like, it's a great time suck. Like who seems to have had an interesting life? There's a lot of people. There's people from like, I don't know, my kindergarten years that like I like knew them back then, and then they just like dropped off the face of the earth. I mean, they obviously didn't, but I'm like, I wonder what they're up to. Like I had a best friend back in kindergarten. And like every now and then I see her pop up because like I went to grad school with her sister. And so I like now see things through there. She like paints horses for a living and they're gorgeous.
That's a job.
Like it's so cool. I'm just like, you were always really good at art, even in kindergarten. Like that says something. So like, you know, that could be cool. Or like there were so many interesting people like in our classes through like elementary school and middle school, and like it's fascinating to see what they're up to. Like I feel like I'm so well connected, even though I like haven't talked to these people in so long. I'm just like, I know
that's just how social media should function.
Yeah, it's so cool. So
just keeping
I mean,
tabs on those.
Yeah, I'm gonna cash in my extra answer on the TED Talk and just like cop out and say there's a lot of people.
Perfectly acceptable. Regarding like someone from kindergarten, I was playing like League of Legends with a bunch of friends that I met through like friends of friends in university and stuff.
Yeah.
And I realized that like some guy who I had only like just encountered in game was connected to like all these people that I personally knew. Just like, what's that guy's name? And then
Mhm.
it turns out that like I went to kindergarten with him. So I'm just like trying to convince him that I went to kindergarten with him because he had no idea who I
Yeah.
was, because my kindergarten had 3 Chris's in it.
Oh
And
yeah.
also it was like 20 years ago. um, yeah, it hurt. It hurt to be forgotten.
Yeah.
But you know what? Still A+ experience.
Yeah, I feel like there's like I haven't gone back and looked at like old class photos because that's a
Yeah.
thing that like we all have access to. But I'm sure there are tons of people that like are just they're not because the way our memory works is like you have to re-experience things in order to
Mhm.
remember it. And if you just have no event to re-experience a person, like they might get replaced by something else that
Yeah,
you
pretty
need
much.
to remember.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, of course it's gonna hurt a little bit, but yeah, it's
Yep.
a
That's
normal
just
process.
life.
I have to pause for a second. I don't know.
Sure.
This is a little unprecedented. My neighbor has just knocked on my door, which also
Yep.
happens to be right beside my computer. So I'm just gonna pop off for
Yeah,
a
it's perfectly
second.
fine.
All right, we'll be back in a minute. Leave you on your own. We
It's
have
perfectly
a
fine. The closest that this is the closest I've previously encountered this scenario was like someone went to go get a thing that they want to show on screen.
yeah.
Uh, I've now learned that I could just like pause the recording a bit instead of having to like sit here and vamp, which is much
Right.
easier. It's
Yeah.
gonna look weird for whoever watches the YouTube version of this, but the
Well,
transition for the audio version will be seamless. Hopefully at least.
that's okay. Yeah, it's one of the things I've learned is like not ideal about having my desk like right next to the door with like a giant window is that people can see that I'm here, and so I can't just be like,
Ignoring.
yeah,
So
I'm not here. It's like, oh no, I made eye contact with you. I can't. That's okay.
yeah, it's all
It's all
good.
good stuff. We're my partner and I are going to look at the art of a person in our community. We've
Hey.
actually been like talking and hanging out with like our neighbors, which is super cool. We're learning like so much about the people that like we've lived next to for like 5 years.
Oh wow.
And so this guy has like an art collection. We're gonna go check it out. So
Neat.
he just wanted to confirm that.
I think in like my 28 years, I've never like learned my neighbors' identities in any way.
You know, I think that's more common than you'd expect.
Yeah.
Especially with like apartment living, but just in general, like a lot of people just never have a reason
Mhm.
to need to meet their neighbors, and often just like don't make the effort to go out and do it because they don't have a reason to, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a risk
It's like, what am I
without,
doing this for?
yeah, exactly. Whereas like as soon as COVID hit, our neighborhood, we live on like a half street that has like a dead end, and so
Mhm.
the community was already very close. We weren't necessarily as close to everybody else because we're like new to the street and like we're kind of young compared to because like they're all homeowners and stuff in
Mhm.
Vancouver, which like says
Yeah.
something. But they like immediately started having these like happy hours out on the street, and we'd all
Oh,
sit very distanced apart from each
good.
other on the lawn
I
and just
appreciate you
like,
emphasizing the distancing.
yes, it's
Very
very
important.
important. But it was really nice to get to know all these people and like understand who is in this community with you. And now like, you know, we say hi to everybody on the street and it feels really good. It feels good to be connected
Mhm.
to people that are around you. Like, so there you go. If that's motivation to go say hi to a neighbor sometime, then there you go. that's
Go for
that's your push. Lots of life advice today.
it. Gonna be hard to jot all these down in the plugs, just like things you should do.
I have a solution for that though. Don't worry.
Perfect. So yeah, did you have any further questions for me?
Yes. Okay. I have like it's like a deep question, and like you can not answer the
Oh
super
yeah,
deep version if you want.
sure.
But this is because it's something I've been thinking about in my own life, and as we're talking about like the need to take risks and the need to like take your ideas and turn them into actions,
Mhm.
Chris. what is it that you are working towards to like make your impact on the world? Like what's your goal? What's your goal in life? What are you working towards? How are you going to get there? I want to know, like, who are you at your core?
Gotcha. Um, so this was actually one of the other things I've been like thinking about a lot lately, where I just like I've never had an aim for my future at like any stage of my life, really. It's just always been like I think even when I was a kid, my snarky answer to like what do you want to be when you grow up was just like happy.
Yep.
I've
Hey,
recently
that's a
learned that,
better answer than most people give.
yeah, but also like the idea in general is just like, you know, a lot of times a lot of people don't reach their goals. Like aim for the stars and you'll, or like
Yep.
whatever. Aim for the moon and you'll land amongst stars, or whatever.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I've thought a lot about like just sort of aiming higher, but I can never devise a like singular goal to work toward. It's always just been like I'm gonna exist,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna keep existing because
Mm-hmm.
existing is fine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but like to what end I'm doing anything is not clear to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I would love to just like be able to make a living off of like entertaining others. There was a time where really want to be an actor. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's why I tried joining improv.
Yeah.
But then I became like increasingly aware of like my stage fright. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like, well, maybe don't do that. Um, yeah, it's currently just the struggle of finding a goal, and
Mm-hmm.
the fact that it's like so open ended
Mm-hmm.
fills me with some dread
Mm-hmm.
because like as previously mentioned, failure and rejection is just like something that I have hard time processing. So it's just like
Mm-hmm.
I can't make the wrong choice, but I it's like an internal battle because like I know that
Yeah.
that's wrong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's where I am with in terms of like goals.
Yeah. You
Um,
know, I think that's pretty. You might be surprised at how many other people feel that, even if they say that they're working towards a certain goal. It may actually be the case that, like, if you really prod and say, like, okay, but you've mentioned, so like a lot of the people that I work with are like undergraduates who are like, I want to go to grad school, and you're like, yes, that's a goal.
mm,
What do you want to do after grad school? And then you find out that they actually have a lot of the same kind of existential like confusion of like, well, but I don't know long term. I don't know what it is that I want to contribute to the world. I don't know what it is that I expect the world to give me in return.
mhm.
I don't know what like my priorities are with different aspects of my life. Like, it's a hard thing to think
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
So here, if I can give you the advice that I give my undergrads and really should be giving myself at this moment in my life
For
as
sure.
well. So future me, if I'm watching this is for you too. Um, think more in terms of the kinds of activities that make you feel fulfilled. So not necessarily like this is the like the job title that I want to
Mhm.
have, or this is the role that I want to fill. Like, you can think a lot more abstractly about that. Um, about like, what is it that I have skills in? What is it that I could develop skills in that would allow me to put something into the world that I'm like very proud of? And for a lot of people that could be like, well, I want to have a family, and that is for me the most important thing. I want to contribute specifically to the life of this set number of offspring.
Mhm.
And that is a completely valid and very common thing that people want, right? For other people, it could be like, I have these ideas and I want those ideas out into the world. And so for like a lot of scientists, that's something that's important, is like, I want to understand like what truth is in the world. But the thing is, you can get to those outcomes in a lot of different ways. And so once you figure out like, these are the kinds of things, like this is how I would evaluate success in my life. You can get there in a lot of different ways. And that's where it's really useful to like take stock of like, these are the skills I have, these are the experiences I have, these are the connections that I have to access new experiences, new skills, and yada, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. And then you can kind of go from there and say like, all right, well, to choose your own adventure, like what's going to be something that can move me towards this goal of something in the world. But what's also worth noting is that it doesn't need to be super complicated. I think we sometimes think about our lives as being these things that like, you know, we have to get perfect. Like, mm-hmm. Yes, I need to be like a medical doctor and that's the only way that I can help people. And it's like, well, not necessarily. Like there are people on my street during COVID that helped people, and that had nothing to do with being a doctor. That had everything to do with the fact that they were social conveners in a time of uncertainty. And so you can get a lot of those same outcomes and feel like you have a purpose and that you've been successful in your life in a lot of different ways. And so kind of rethinking the goals in those like more abstract terms can be really helpful for figuring out how to move forward when you're at a crossroads or when you're feeling kind of stuck.
Mm-hmm. That is good advice.
It's advice that I was given by many people. It's advice that I pass on whenever I can. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can let that sink in, really like ring in people's ears.
Yeah.
I guess the other part of this though is it's also worth noting that like you are the expert of you. So you may have lots of advisors that say, oh, you should do this, you should do this. At the end of the day, they may have lots of knowledge about you, but it's necessarily not going to be as complete as your own knowledge about yourself. Mm-hmm. And so it's also really useful to remember that like you are the only person that knows all of the constraints that you're facing and all of the things that you have access to and everything that's going on. And so take advice from whoever you trust, but remember that like at the end of the day, they might not know everything about you and that you might have things going on that make their suggestions not feasible in the moment, and that's okay too.
Yeah, I think the idea that like there's anything anybody should be doing over what they're currently doing is like an oddly unnecessary sort of thought process to have, if that makes any sense. Or just like, mm-hmm. I think as a baseline, anything that anyone's doing currently should be like, or like is appropriate for who they are. Mm-hmm. The idea of like sort of potential and like, yeah, just things that should be done otherwise is like kind of a negative and detracts from accepting the reality of things.
Mm-hmm. It's difficult to balance those, like pushing yourself to be whatever, to be a new person, whether that person is better or not is not necessarily for us to evaluate, but pushing yourself to be a new person in some respect, and then also balancing the realities of your situation. Mm-hmm. Again, it's the kind of thing that like you are the expert. Yeah, and you test things out and you test things that you feel are safe within the world that you have, and sometimes you're able to take risks and sometimes you're just not able to take a risk, and that's okay.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's a tricky like mental state to switch to, but in general, it's a healthier one.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
This is the most real that this podcast has ever gotten.
I
always
like. What happens when you bring a psychologist?
Yeah. I for the most part, I do like somewhat dread when the tables turn and I open myself up to questions.
No, I think that's good because the reason people listen to your podcast is because they're interested in you and the people you know, but also in you.
Very, very true. I was just gonna say something snarky, and then I forgot it anyway. So it doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
It's
Well, I'll just have to imagine something snarky.
yes. Let's talk about a choose your own adventure. Yeah, I think ideally, something I want in the world is probably something that starts sort of within myself, where like, especially in this current pandemic,
Mhm.
I don't want people to like feel isolated or alone.
Yeah.
Because I had that experience and it sucked. And if
Yeah.
I can like make that better elsewhere,
Mm-hmm.
probably starting with myself, because
Mm-hmm.
there are some times where I still feel like kind of outside of everything.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's what I want.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. I think that's something that a lot of people could use help with, that sometimes it can be challenging when you feel isolated, that you don't know what to do in that moment. And I think that's exactly where, if you've had that experience and you've made the best of it, those are absolutely skills that are really useful to share with people right now. And reaching out and doing stuff like this is so valuable to show people that like it's possible. It
Yeah.
has good outcomes. Like, it's not as risky as you might think it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a thing that you've already done.
Yeah.
It's a thing that you are already doing. Like, you should feel proud of that. This is your hype session.
Thank you. Thank you.
Like, that's what I do a lot now. I'm part of all these like different groups and like the mentoring that I do. It's a lot of like, yes, you are capable. But you know what? I need it just as much as everybody else does. And so
pay it forward.
Let's do that for everybody. Let's all be each other's hype people, right?
Hell yeah.
There we go.
Carolyn, it's been an absolute delight getting to talk to you again.
Yeah, you too.
As you're well familiar, this section is called plugs.
Mm-hmm.
I give you a moment to sort of promote anything you want to get out there, something that should take people's attention or put their attention toward.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to go to the speaker view and just take it away.
Excellent. I've been putting like a lot of thought into this because I'm like, oh man, like I could plug my own research. And I thought like, no. Now is not the time for that. People can look that up on their own time. Right now is a super weird time for everybody, let's face it. So maybe this is weird, but I want to plug another podcast. It's not my podcast. There's a podcast called The Happiness Lab. It is done by a professor at Yale. Her name's Laurie Santos. She's wonderful. The podcast itself is basically like the science of being happy. And so a lot of the things that I've already said today are based on things that she talks about in this podcast. And this was something that I listened to back in, March, April, May, when everything was just going topsy-turvy. And maybe it's because I'm a scientist myself. I really liked hearing that there are scientifically backed ways to make yourself happier and be fulfilled in life. And it really changed my perspective on a lot of things. And I think that it can help a lot of people. And it's a podcast. It's easy listening. So that's what I'd like to plug today.
Wonderful. We'll add a link to that in the description of everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, so unless you got anything else, I think that is it for us here today on the show. Thank you so much once again for sharing this time.
Well, thank you. I'm so honored that you reached out to me. I've been watching this for a little bit and I'm like, oh, that would be so fun. I'm so glad this happened.
Me too. And yeah, so thank you anyone for listening.
Who made it to the end.
Yeah, you made it to the end, and just have a good day.
You too.
Go be happy.
Yes,
exactly. Or try.
That's the theme.
All right. I'll talk to someone new next time. So take care.
Perfect.